Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Tina Walia and I'm pleased to be your host today. This evening, we continue our health and wellness journey with our webinar, Defeating Diabetes. Our distinguished speaker, Dr. Peter Lin, explores the latest innovative advances in diabetes treatment. The Ripple Effect Wellness Organization, or TRIVO, was founded by Dr. Sudhi Devanesan and Mr. Ravi Juneja in 2009. TRIVO's mission is to create healthy communities through education. One of our main goals is to inspire change at a personal level. Think of it as a ripple effect, a drop of information that challenges the status quo and spreads in ever-widening circles to make a positive influence and generate significant results. The Webinar Outreach Wing, or WOW, is a branch of TRIVO, and we have been serving our community for well over 6 years. We host a number of webinars throughout the year by inviting leading medical experts to empower and educate our audience. Dr. Sudhi Devanesan is the president of TRIVO. Dr. Devanesan is a family medicine physician, an educator, and a public health activist. He was inducted as a member of the Order of Canada in 2001 for his role in health and prevention of heart disease among South Asians. He has also been the Chief of Department of Family and Community Medicine at St. Michael's Hospital. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Sudhi Devanesan to you all.
Thank you very much, Tina, for that wonderful introduction. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this wonderful webinar. Once again, we have an outstanding speaker, Dr. Peter Lin. And I'm so glad that he was able to get back here on time from his many travels around the globe. Tonight, we'll be hearing a lot of innovative and new ways in treating diabetes, and it's going to be very exciting. I want to thank the Webinar Outreach Wing under the leadership of Smita Chandra for their hard work in bringing this evening together. It's an amazing event. And TRIVO has embraced many possibilities in the future. And we look forward to seeing you all again at the next webinar. But before we go into that, I want to introduce a word which I chose actually in honor of Peter Lin. The word is Yang Shen, or Y-A-N-G-S-H-E-N, and it's pronounced Yang Shun. It's a Mandarin word from ancient Chinese wisdom, and it's about health. It's about nurturing yourself. It's about living a life of positivity and vitality. It's about the discipline of daily meditation, exercise, and proper diet, good sleep. All these things have been known for centuries. And here in today's talk, I'm very sure that Peter is going to mention some of these things. Now, remember that word, Yang Shen. Yang Shen. Embrace it, utilize it to live a healthy life and a long and happy one too. Now, I want to talk to you about the Imagination Gala, which is coming up on October the 19th. I'm hoping that you would go to our website, and some of you can still make it to the ball. Please buy tickets or tables and support us. It's for a very good cause, the Falls Prevention Program, the Trillium Health Partners Foundation, and for the Roofs for the Roofless in Chennai, looking after senior citizens in the villages of South India. So I thank you for your attention, and back to you now, Tina.
Thank you, Dr. Sudhi, for continuing to enrich our vocabulary with a new word or a new story at every webinar. Thank you. I would like to remind the audience about the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Before we introduce our distinguished speaker, please help us serve you better by answering this simple poll, which will only take a few seconds of your time. We just have 3 questions. The first one being, do you have a family member with diabetes? Number 2 is, are you concerned about diabetes? And we have 3 choices. And the last question would be, are there any health professionals in the audience caring for people with diabetes? All of these questions and the answers would help us and the speaker tonight in addressing some of the concerns. We thank you for taking the time to answer the poll. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Peter Lynn, to you all. He is the Director, Primary Care Initiatives at the Canadian Heart Research Centre and has a busy family practice in Toronto, Canada. Dr. Lynn is an internationally renowned speaker. He's a popular guest on CBC radio and television, discussing topics of health and wellness. Today, Dr. Lynn shares with us his vast knowledge of diabetes and the latest innovative treatments available. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Peter Lynn.
Thanks very much, Tina. So I'm just going to share my slides. So you always run a beautiful program here, and I'm really honored to be the guest of honor today. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you about diabetes. I thought I'd start off, first of all, by congratulating your organization. I mean, you have done such wonderful work, and Dr. D, underneath your leadership, this has grown every year that I come back. I always see you guys improving, and I'm learning new vocabulary, even in Mandarin, you know, where I should know something, but you have taught me something as well. I thought I'd start off with this wonderful picture here. You're isolated, so if you want to get away from the rest of the world, it's okay, but not too isolated. You'll see in the corner here, there are some people. So if you get into trouble, at least there's some people to help. But perhaps we all need some sort of getaway. And tonight we're going to get away and talk about diabetes and what it's all about. Now, I think many of us might have seen this, that basically it's sugar, needles. This is what we're thinking about, insulin, something about diet. And those are the things that we're thinking about. And I noticed from the poll, for sure, you know, many people know somebody with diabetes, and concern of diabetes is very high. And that's why I think you're here. So what I'm going to talk about is some concepts about diabetes, how we can maybe prevent diabetes, some of the treatment concepts that we have here, and some new things like, for example, microplastics. So I was just at a big conference on microplastic and pollution and the effects on our body. And so unfortunately, it can affect our sugar levels as well. I wanted to show you this picture of the ants. And so this is how we used to diagnose diabetes in the olden days. So this is during the emperor's time. You would pee on a bunch of rocks. If the ants come, then you have sugar in your pee, and therefore we diagnose diabetes. So thankfully, we don't have to pee on a pile of rocks anymore, but certainly we do have different ways of detecting it. And just to remind you, this is the Krebs cycle. It's a horrible cycle, and this is how we make energy inside our body. And I just wanted to point out that we put in glucose, which is sugar, and fatty acids, which is coming from fatty foods that we eat. So those are the 2 fuel sources that goes into this engine that makes us have power. And so therefore, all of our cells burn glucose and fat. And so therefore, glucose is a very important part of our system. It's when we have too much of it that we get into trouble. Unfortunately, glucose sticks to things. So just like sugar on this candy apple, it sticks to things. Now, I say that's bad, but actually we do need sugar to stick to things for normal bodily function. So for example, we have these proteins, right? So this is an example of a protein. So proteins are like your skin, your hair, everything is proteins. You know, the antibodies that you made from the vaccine, those are all proteins. And so we make proteins and they help us do many things in our body. But what we do is we add a piece of sugar. So this is a polysaccharide, which is those sugar things attached to it. And by adding the sugar to the protein, we can change the shape. So therefore, we can make different shaped proteins that can do different things for us. So having sugar stick to proteins helps us make different molecules that we can use within our body. So you could see that this is the same shape of the protein, but if I change this part over here, this will now become a different looking shape and therefore do a different process for us. So therefore, glycosylation, which is sugar sticking to proteins, is very useful in our body. The time that it becomes not useful is when it's sticking in places that it shouldn't be sticking. So when there's too much sugar in your blood, for example, it starts to stick inside the blood vessel wall. So inside the blood vessels, there are proteins. It will stick to those ones, and it causes this damage. You know, these blood vessels become very weak, and therefore you start to bleed. So in diabetes, the sugar sticks to those blood vessels, they become clogged up, so now there's no blood flow going there, or perhaps they become weak, and therefore the blood vessels are likely to bleed. And you can see these are hemorrhages of the back of the eye. So this is a picture of the back of your eye, and you can imagine that this person has had lots of problems with their diabetes and this particular complication. And so diabetes, when there's too much sugar in your bloodstream, then that becomes a problem because it's now sticking to things inside your pipes. Now, in the back of the eye is one place, but we have a lot of arteries throughout our whole body. So this is our whole body in terms of those pipes that the sugar can stick to. So that's why people with diabetes, unfortunately, have more strokes. So therefore, the artery going up there is being affected. They have more eye problems, as I showed you. They have more heart disease because all the pipes there have sugar sticking inside, and also kidney disease because the sugar will stick inside there as well. And PAD just means the circulation going into your legs. So your peripheral artery disease basically will be narrowing of those blood vessels. So you might have lack of blood flow to your calf muscles. And some people say my calves hurt when I walk too much. So that's actually clogging up of the pipes going down into your legs. And then sometimes the blood vessels going into the skin gets affected. And so the skin breaks down and you form these little ulcers that we see on the toes and on the legs of people with diabetes. And of course, amputation, if we have to stop infection from coming in, we unfortunately have to sometimes take amputation. So these are the complications if we don't treat diabetes well. And I think some of us might remember these complications in grandma or something like that, because in those days, maybe we weren't treating diabetes as well. We didn't have very many medications. We didn't understand the disease as well. Whereas nowadays, because we understand the disease, we understand that we have many medications to use and many lifestyle choices, then we can avoid all of these complications. So for those that said that they know somebody with diabetes, they do not have to end up with this horrible list of things. This is more like in the past when we were sort of not as good as managing diabetes that we were getting into trouble. This is talking about sugar sticking. So one of the measures that we measure is sugar sticking to your blood. So some of you that have diabetes will know about the A1C level. And this is just saying of your blood, how much of it has sugar stuck to. So we give you a percentage, 7%, 8% of your blood has sugar stuck to it. And so we use that as a measurement of sugar sticking inside the rest of your body. And so therefore, if you have, more sugar sticking inside, that's going to be a bad thing. So this is over time. So let's say over 15, 16 years. So let me show you this one patient. They get treated very nicely in the beginning. Their sugar comes down, so there's less sugar sticking. And then over time, they get lazy, and I get lazy, so then we don't treat the person very well. So now there's more and more sugar sticking over time. Versus this person, where we treat them very well. We get them down into this range, which is almost normal. So below 6% is normal, and we keep them there for a long duration of time. So the difference between these two patients is this amount of damage. So this person has much more damage than this person would have, much more sugar sticking. So let's say 10 years later, we take this guy and then we give him insulin and we give him, the best medications at that point. We can make his sugar come down so that it's joining this person. So now they're looking like they're the same. However, this person has already gotten the damage. So even though their sugars are the same at this point, the amount of damage is already sitting very high. And so this patient will still do worse. So even though their sugars are controlled now, they will still do poorly. So that's why it's important to treat early, for example. In other words, get that sugar down and then also do it as quickly as you can so that there isn't any accumulation of damage. So it's kind of like having a car accident. Once you have a car accident, it's hard to undo the car accident. So we'd like to avoid car accidents if we can. So let's just make sure that we take care of things very early. I love this picture. He's now trying to draw on the wall, using urine. So we used to measure urine, and we still do, where we can check whether you have sugar in your urine. So this is the glucose. It changes colors, and therefore we can measure it that way. So that's one way of measuring sugar within your body. But as you know, let's say this person's sugar is here, and then you spill over. Everybody will spill sugar at a different level. So for example, in this situation, the person's blood sugar has to be very high before they start putting it into their urine. On the other hand, this person, not a whole lot of sugar, and they start to spill. So therefore, the urine test isn't as good because we don't know exactly what's happening in the bloodstream. And so therefore, we started to take blood samples. But then blood samples was cumbersome. We'd have to take the blood, send it away. And then eventually we said, well, why don't we just poke your finger and then we can get a tiny little sample and the machine can read it for you right then and there. So we were getting closer and closer to the real blood sugar level, and we were getting it into a faster time frame that we can look at. And so therefore you could write all these numbers down, but it was very cumbersome to do that. And now you might have seen some people wearing a little sensor. So this thing has a little plastic tip inside the skin, and it's measuring the sugar inside the skin. And so therefore you can actually have it read off of your phone or off of one of these devices. So you can see what happens when you eat the chocolate bar and things like that. You can see the sugars go up and down. Very interestingly, we had one of the specialists who really likes to eat frosted flakes. So then she ate frosted flakes and she saw her sugar go crazy. But when she mixed it with milk, the milk has fat in it, and the fat slows down your stomach emptying. So instead of just pushing the sugar right in, it was slowing it down because your body had to digest the fat. And so the sugar didn't go very high. So you could see that mixing different types of foods, timing of different things might have different effects. So therefore, for those that are interested, these kind of devices can teach you what's happening in your body, what happens with exercise, what happens if you eat white rice versus brown rice. So these are things that we can now detect by some of these little devices that we have here. In Ontario, if you are on insulin shots, then you are qualified to get these little sensors covered for you. But for people that are not on insulin shots, it's not covered. It's something that you would have to pay for. But then nonetheless, it's maybe an education about how these things work and how your body works. And these sensors last for about 2 weeks on your body at each time. In terms of how big of a problem is this worldwide, so these are the numbers of millions of people with diabetes. And you could see as we move forward, we're talking about 780 million people with diabetes. And if we don't do a good job, those complications that I showed you, strokes and heart attacks, those things are going to be overwhelming. So that's why we want to prevent diabetes, and we also want to treat diabetes very well as well. So this is what we normally think about as diabetes. All my patients say, but I don't eat sugar. And so it is true. Initially, it's all about what you eat. That's one component of it, and what you burn. So in other words, if you burn off the sugar, then that would be a good thing. So that was our very simplified version of how our body works. But there's differences in what you eat, right? For example, if I fed you this versus flour, right? So this one is, I've ground it up, I've processed it. So which one would the sugar come out faster? Well, obviously, this one, the sugar would come out much faster over here. And so therefore, in terms of the flour, it's been processed. If I cook that up for you or I make it into bread, the sugar will come out very quickly in this case. This one, it still has the husk on it and things like that. Your body would have to grind it. It would have to work very hard before it can extract the sugar out. So therefore, people started to measure something called glycemic index. How fast does the sugar come out? Because if the food releases the sugar very quickly, then your body has to deal with all that extra sugar very quickly. So that would be like a rainfall. You know, when we have those terrible rainfalls and we can't handle all that rain, then flooding happens and bad things happen. So therefore, if we keep eating foods that have very fast release of sugar, then our body will have a hard time handling it, and therefore we're going to have more problems with sugar being high and getting stuck all over the place. Ideally, when we eat something, we would like it to slowly come in, and our insulin will chaperone the glucose into the cell. It'll say, here, please go into here where you will be used up or stored. And so if we do that in a nice organized way, then you won't have very high sugar in your blood. But if we were to feed you lots of things that the sugar is released very quickly, then your insulin may not have enough time to chaperone everybody out this way. And so therefore your sugars would be very high. So these are things that you can look up, known as the glycemic index of foods. The higher the number, the faster it releases the sugar. And so let's say, for example, within fruits, right? Fruits are generally good for you. You can see grapefruit doesn't release sugar very much, but you can see watermelon releases sugar quite quickly. Same with pineapple. So if you're thinking, I'm so healthy, I eat pineapple and I eat watermelon, there isn't actually a higher sugar that's coming across. So looking at these tables, you can pick things with lower numbers, and therefore you don't have to stress out your system in terms of handling that sugar coming in. So basically, we started off with glucose as the centerpiece because we can measure that very easily. And in the olden days, patients came in and said, I'm peeing a lot. So their sugar is high in their blood, and then it would spill into the urine, and that's why they were peeing a lot. Because they were peeing so much, they were getting thirsty because they were getting dehydrated, so they had to drink a lot. So in the olden days, we said you diagnose diabetes when people pee a lot and they're very thirsty, and that's how we figured it out. Nowadays, when you do your annual checkup or something like that, we just check your blood directly. So I don't have to wait until you have to do all this sugar peeing and everything else. We can actually see it much earlier, and therefore we can intervene much earlier. Now, in the beginning, we only knew about glucose and insulin. Those were the two things that we thought about. And basically, as I said, the insulin is the chaperone that will get the glucose to go into the cell. And once inside the cell, remember that Krebs cycle thing, it gets burnt for energy. And any extra glucose will be stored as fat and for a rainy day in case there's no more food. We then quickly learned that there's something called glucagon. Glucagon is another hormone, I guess, if you will, and that thing tells your liver to put out glucose. In other words, it makes the liver release some, extra money. So think of glucose like money. So the liver will now release extra money when you're not eating. So tonight, when you're sleeping there and you're not eating anything, how do we keep the sugar moving around in your body? Well, the liver is the one lending out the sugar throughout the night. And so therefore, that is the reason why you can still have glucose floating around in your body. And then finally, we have the intestine. Now, the food is coming in through your stomach. How does it tell the rest of the body that food is coming in? Because think about it, right? The stomach is very far away from the liver. It's very far away from your pancreas where the insulin is. How do we get a messaging system there? And so therefore, the messages that we send from the gut are known as incretins. And one you might have heard of is GLP-1. So GLP-1 is a message that says, you know what? The food has reached this position. So at the lower part of the intestine, when there's food there, it sends out this chemical, GLP-1, and that's the message that tells everybody food has made it down here. So now the pancreas knows I need to make insulin. The liver knows I don't need to put out sugar because food is coming in. And the brain says food is down there. I don't need to eat anymore. So that one message is very good. And it's a very good message because it's just whoever needs the message can pick it up, right? See, right now, if I wanted to text Dr. D, I need his phone number, right? Whereas, in this case, I'm just going to send out a message that food is here. Whoever needs the message, they will have a receptor that grabs that chemical message so that they know no food is here. So the brain is one of those places that need that message so that you don't eat. So you could see that GLP-1 is an important signaling message. So it's like a text message coming, food is here. And so therefore it'll tell the insulin to go up because now you have to escort all this glucose in, and it'll tell the glucagon, you can take it easy. There's no need to put sugar in there because we're getting supplies coming from the intestine. Now, what happens when there's no messaging? So let me just show it to you this way. So here's the food that you're eating. And then here's the small intestine right there that produces this GLP-1 that I was talking about. And this GLP-1 will tell you the pancreas, make more insulin, okay? So therefore insulin goes up to chaperone all the glucose. At the same time, it'll tell the glucagon, you don't need to do anything more. So therefore you don't have to put sugar into the bloodstream. So this is in the normal system. In a patient with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, what's happened is that this thing isn't working. So this one, there's too little of this signal. So if there's too little of GLP-1, then this signal going here is too small, so you don't make enough insulin to escort all the glucose into their cells. At the same time, this is not shutting down. And so therefore, there's very little glucagon shutting down. And so therefore, you have tons of glucagon, which is telling the liver to put more sugar into your bloodstream. And so you could see that this will result in higher sugars because this guy is not working. And so therefore, some of you had typed in Ozempic. Okay, so Ozempic is a artificial GLP-1. So we made a GLP-1-like molecule, and then you inject that in there, and it's good for 1 week. And so therefore, what we're doing is we're replacing the message. And so now the message is there is food down here in the stomach, so you don't need to eat. And we're telling the pancreas to do the right things. And so therefore, one of the questions in the question answer thing just now I saw was, what's one of the side effects? Well, if I tell you that there's food at the bottom of the small intestine, that would be like saying there's a traffic jam at the bottom of the Don Valley, then I'm not going to send cars down there as fast. So that's why your stomach slows down. So it doesn't want to push a lot of food down there because it's getting the signal that there's food down there already because we've injected that thing in there. So therefore, your stomach slows down, and that's one of the side effects is gastric slowing. Some people get constipated, they get nauseous, they might even vomit if you do too much. And also when you process your food, your stomach is slowed down. So therefore, when you eat things, you'll get full very quickly, and some people feel very nauseous about that. So in this situation, just make sure you eat small amounts of food and make sure that you basically don't overload yourself, like don't stuff yourself. As soon as you feel like you're about full, just stop, and then everything will be okay in that situation. Now, the Ozempic craze was this GLP-1 story, and you've seen, famous people take it and they lose weight and things like that. And so let me just show it to you in this way. So incretins are messages, and here's that little spot where it produces that GLP-1. And like I said, this is GLP-1 basically is the signal that food is here. And so therefore, the body parts that need that information will grab that information. And just to let you know, many body parts need this signal. So for example, the brain, the stomach, the liver, the heart, the pancreas, they all want the signal that food is there because that's important information for it. So for example, when your brain gets the signal, then basically it says, I feel full now because my stomach is full of food. I don't need to eat. And so therefore you stop eating, and therefore your body rate would go down. So that's why people are using these drugs to lose weight, because it shuts off their center by saying there's food in my stomach, there's no need to eat anymore. In terms of your pancreas, we talked about the insulin coming up and the glucagon going down. So everything goes in the right direction to monitor and maintain your sugar. There's cardiovascular benefits as well. So your heart and your blood vessels also benefit from this. And we've noticed that there is less heart disease and less death in people that are using these agents, especially for weight loss. And then here's the liver. Remember, the liver is in charge of pushing sugar out, but is also in charge of collecting fat. And it turns out that these agents will basically tell the liver you don't need to store fat. So it may be able to get rid of fat out of your liver when you've heard of fatty liver. And then, of course, the stomach is this emptying business. And so therefore, it slows down the emptying of your stomach. It makes you feel full. And so therefore, don't overeat if you're using these medications. Otherwise, you'll get very nauseous. So what about if we sent you two messages? Okay, so there are another agents, and you might have heard of this in the news called Mounjaro. And basically, in this case, we say food is here and food is here as well in two different parts of your stomach. And so in this case, we have one signal, the original one that I told you about, GLP-1, but we also have another signal from up here called GIP. So these are two chemical messages, one that's saying food is in the top part of your stomach, and the other one is food is sitting at the bottom part of your intestine. And so therefore, there's a molecule called tirzepatide, and that's the Mounjaro that you might have heard about in the news. So this is basically two messages mixed together. And so therefore, would we have better heart, weight control, sugar control? And we're now waiting for their outcome studies, which means we're looking at, do these drugs reduce heart attacks and strokes and death? So we're waiting for those studies to see whether they have good benefits there. because if you can reduce sugar and we can reduce your weight, that should be good for you in the future as well. So keep your eye in this space. We're basically hacking the messaging system, right? So your body is sending messages back and forth. Sometimes the messages aren't right, so therefore we're correcting them. So medicine is about hacking your system so that we send the right messages. So if the messages are too low, we increase the messages. If the messages are too high, we try to block them off. That's really what we're trying to do in medicine. So now we have a whole list of medication, and some of you might recognize some of these names from the olden days. And we've now moved towards these kind of drugs down here, the GLP-1, and then now the GLP-1 GIP, these sort of messaging systems. SGLT2 inhibitor, basically these are pumps that help you control sugar and salt. And so therefore they help you regulate that. And we've noticed that it's very good for diabetes, also very good for kidney disease and heart failure. So it seems like these medications are now doing more than just controlling sugar. It's also helping the patients as well. So I think the more modern medications seem to have more benefits as we move forward. Well, I like this one. We surveyed women about men, and this is what they said. So this is what we're looking for. And this is what's looking for us. Okay, so definitely two different models. So you can see that, you know, we've moved away from the healthy people. We're now sitting in front of computers. We're not moving around too much with these Zoom calls. We sit there for hours. And so therefore we're gaining weight. And unfortunately, with obesity, we end up having more diseases. We have more arthritis, we have more diabetes, we have more heart disease, because this kind of fat that's sitting in here is actually fat that's wrapped around your intestine and your liver. And that fat produces a lot of chemicals. And that fat is the stuff that makes inflammation happen in your body. And those extra chemicals makes your sugar go up and it makes your cholesterol higher. So all the bad things for your heart is coming from this. And that's why you hear people calling it the toxic fat. We call it visceral fat. So if I were to CT scan you, if I were to take pictures this way, here's one person, and then here's another person, and you can see all this white stuff sitting around the intestine. That's all fat. So this person, not a whole lot of fat. This person, lots of fat inside their belly. And so therefore, subcutaneous fat, this is the baby fat underneath the skin, is higher in this person. But really, this is the fat that we're worried about, is this visceral fat that we're talking about here. And you can see for the visceral fat, this person has 1 liter of visceral fat. This person has 3.7 liters of that white stuff in there. And so therefore, that's going to cause more problem in this particular patient. What about stress? You know, somebody asked me, how come stress causes all these problems? Well, this is stress in nature, right? This happens in nature. And so this is the fight or flight response. So basically for this guy, for both of them, the heart rate goes up, the blood pressure goes up to try and supply blood to the muscles. And your sugar will go up so that you can have fuel for your muscles to burn. So in this situation, these are the right things to happen. I need the heart rate and the blood pressure to go up to send the blood. I need more sugar because my muscles are going to be burning the sugar off, okay? And it's very short-lived, right? So this whole encounter is going to last no more than 2 minutes, right? Either this guy gets away or he becomes dinner, right? So everything is very short. So this red alert situation is actually only on for a very short amount of time. Now we fast forward to humans. So this is what we look like at 8 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is. So we are in that same fight or flight response. Okay. So in other words, our body recognizes this as danger. And so therefore, what's going to happen is that you're going to have danger all day long, actually, because from the moment you wake up, there's stress. And then you have these extra stress as you get stuck in traffic and things like that. So you can imagine now your heart rate is going up, your blood pressure is going up, and your glucose is going up. But you're not running, like you're not burning the sugar. You don't need those things to be up, and yet it's higher. So imagine if all day long I'm under stress, my sugar is going to be running high because my body thinks I need to run away. And unfortunately, I don't need to run away. So the sugar is not being used. And so therefore, we have high sugars sticking to all over the place. And we can now create more diabetes than there should be. So therefore, if we can reduce the stress level, that would be good so that you don't kick in that fight or flight response. That would be a very healthy thing for us. Lack of sleep is a problem. So, you know, some of you have difficulty sleeping, but certainly when you don't sleep because you're trying to do a project or schoolwork or anything like that, now your body sees that as a threat. Because again, if you don't sleep, it means that you're in danger. And so therefore your body is going to pump up your heart rate, your blood pressure, and your sugar. And so now we have all those difficulties yet again. The other thing to be interesting, they've noticed that when you sleep, you actually flush out your brain.
So, you know, the fluid that the brain floats in, the cerebral spinal fluid, when you lie down and you sleep, that fluid goes through your brain and it flushes out all the garbage that's built up during the day. You know, all these, you know, because the brain is working very hard all day long. It's like a kitchen working very hard and it might be a mess afterwards. You need some time to clean it up. And so your sleeping time is actually the cleaning time that happens. So please try and protect your sleep for your brain's sake, but also for your heart's sake and also for the diabetes risk. So they've noticed that people that don't sleep well are higher risk of diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and cancer because you don't have that repair time. And so therefore, let's just protect our sleep, and that can cut down some of these problems as well. This guy's interesting. He's eating very quickly. So war is stockpiling of food. So if I told you right now there's going to be a war and there might not be any food, you guys would all go out and buy cans of food and everything else and get gasoline and hoard. And so, unfortunately, your body will do the same thing. So, when you are under stress, your brain thinks that you're going into battle. And if you're going into battle, that fight or flight thing, then I need you to pack in some extra calories. So, you'll tend to look for fatty foods and salty foods and those kinds of things to pack in the calories so that you're ready for war. So, if you're stressed out, then your body's going to try and collect all this extra energy and carry it with you. If you don't sleep, your body thinks you're in danger. So, again, it will stockpile these things for you. And if you skip meals, because people say, well, you told me I'm fat and I have diabetes, so I decided to skip meals. Now your body thinks that there's a famine, that there's no food. So now when you do eat, it tries to grab everything, you know, because it says, I haven't eaten for 12 hours, so therefore I'm going to have to grab it. And for those that are trying that intermittent fasting, okay, the key there is you can fast as long as you don't get hungry. The moment you kick in and get hungry, all of a sudden your body's going to kick into that fight or flight mode. I better grab all the food that I can. So therefore, if you want to do that intermittent fasting, do not go to the point of hunger, because as soon as you kick in hunger, you're going to be storing everything all over again. Okay. The microbiome system is very interesting. So when President Obama left office, he said there's 6 areas of medicine that's important, and microbiome, you know, the bacteria that live in your body, is a very important one. And we think of the bowel having the most bacteria, but our skin has a microbiome, your sinuses have a microbiome. So these are the healthy bacteria that keep that environment well. And we used to think that these are just bacteria hitching a ride, you know, like those sharks with those little fish that hang around with them. It turns out we borrow a lot of power from these bacteria. So we need them to process off a lot of the food that we eat and take care of a lot of the chemicals that we get exposed to. So it's not that they're relying on us. We rely on them to help us. So to give you an idea, our genes, our DNA, and let's say our genes, we have 23,000 genes. And let's say each gene makes a protein that does something useful for us. So we can make a bunch of proteins. In the case of the bacteria that we carry with us, they have 3.3 million genes. So we have 23,000, they have 3.3 million. So they can process a whole lot more things. So we actually rely on the microbiome. So that's why now they're saying, please don't take too many antibiotics if you don't have to, because you don't want to kill off the good guys that are there. Also, a different variety of foods would be helpful, because then you can have more variety of the microbiome with you so that you can process off different things as well. Do you need to take probiotics, like, you know, the bacteria? I say no, because those things only contain about 4 different bacteria. Your intestine has 1,000. So 1,000 versus 4. And so I don't want to skew it so that those 4 take over. I want to keep the 1,000. So therefore, I'm of the mindset that maybe we don't do the probiotics, because unfortunately we go from 1,000 and then we give a special advantage to those 4. So in fact, we might be reducing the diversity if we give you only 4 of those bacterium. So I would say that maybe we don't have to invest in those ones as well. But how does this tie back to diabetes? Remember that GLP-1 and all those other things? So let me just show you something. So these are cells that are on the lining, those small intestinal cells that we talked about. And it turns out there's the L cell. That's the guy that makes the GLP-1. Remember, he makes the GLP-1, and then the GLP-1 helps you to manage the sugar and the message and all that kind of stuff. So who helps this guy make it? It turns out the bacteria in your intestine, they produce these 2 chemicals, okay? And these 2 chemicals are needed in order to make this GLP-1. So in other words, if the bacteria are not good, then you don't have the raw materials to make this. So if you have no aluminum, then we can't make aluminum things as well. So that's why the microbiome becomes important, because it's directly related to your body making GLP-1, therefore affecting the signaling and everything else that happens thereafter. And so therefore, if the bacteria is not good, then all of these systems will begin to fail. Okay. Oh, I like this one. So I just finished giving a talk in Saudi Arabia on microplastics. So this is our camel drinking from the plastic. And you know, the traditional thing we say, you know, we drink plastic and then we put it in the ocean and then the fish eats it and then we eat the fish. So this is sort of, it sounds like such a long chain before we get plastic into our body. But we have to remember that we are the first person to use the plastic. Then we throw it away. So the fish is secondhand, and then we get it back third hand when we eat the fish. So really, we're getting the first hand in terms of the microplastics. And so this was an article that came out in March of this year talking about microplastic inside the arteries of people. And this caught everybody's attention. And so this was what was happening in this study. So these surgeons in Italy, they were trying to take out the cholesterol that was building up in the neck arteries. So they detected that there was a blockage. These people had not had a stroke yet. So the idea is take out that blockage. And then that way, by taking this out, they won't have a stroke. So you can save them. But what they did is when they took out this stuff, they sent it off to look for plastic inside. So they got a big microscope, these electron microscopes, and they looked at those sections of things that they pulled out of people. And there you have it. You see little pieces of plastic sitting inside the plaque of those arteries. And you can look over here that this is plastic, and this is a macrophage. So this is outside a macrophage. Macrophage is kind of like your army cells that go and fight for you. So this is plastic on the outside of the macrophage, and this is plastic on the inside of the macrophage. So it is inside your army cells as well. And so therefore the plastic is getting all over the place. Now there's a concern that plastic, it's going to cause inflammation and things like that. So what kind of plastic did they find? And what you hear is polyethylene. That's the most common plastic, like plastic bags, containers, and everything else. This is the number of people that had it and how much milligrams or micrograms they had in there. So about 60% of the 250 people in the study had plastic inside their plaque. There's a second one is polyvinyl chloride. At first, I didn't recognize this, but the short form is PVC. You know, the PVC pipes that we use in our plumbing and things like that. And you can see here about 12% of them had it as well. So there was an overlap, and some of them actually had two types of plastic sitting inside there that we're seeing. The concern that we have is that everybody had the surgery to remove the cholesterol. Unfortunately, the people without microplastic did very well. Like, what's their chance of having a heart attack, stroke, or dying in the next 3.5 years? Unfortunately, the people that had microplastic in their plaque, they were much more likely to have a heart attack, stroke, or die in the next 3.5 years, about 4.5 times more likely. So therefore, microplastic might be another thing that we have to think about. And it turns out microplastic may affect diabetes rates as well. And so if you look at the fruits and vegetables that you want to eat, here's microplastic. Do you think that there's any microplastic in these things? Broccoli, carrots, lettuce, apple. This is the amount of microplastic per gram. And unfortunately, there is microplastic even in the fresh fruits and things like that that we're eating. And so that's the concern, is that that stuff may be doing bad things here. And if you have diabetes and then we go and mess up with your cholesterol plaques, it increases your risk of having heart attacks and strokes. And there's also some data that says microplastic may also damage your pancreas and therefore increase diabetes and et cetera as well. So when do we have to worry about plastic? High temperatures. So whenever you have high temperature and plastic, that's going to be a big situation. So therefore, that water bottle that you put in your car, and you know how when you get back to it, it's really hot and it's kind of soft, that has a lot of microplastic in it. So please don't put cases of water inside your car because it's going to get very hot inside the car. And please don't give it to your children after their soccer matches or any, because they're now just drinking microplastic particles, okay? Microwaving in plastic, you're going to have plastic particles coming into your food as well because there's now temperature. In terms of dishwashing, if you put plastic into the dishwasher, there will be more microplastic in the water as it goes out, okay? So it's going to feed more microplastic into our lakes and things like that. Your washer dryer will also send microplastic there because polyester is polyester, which is a plastic. And so therefore you're going to have more plastic going into the water supply. And then also, you know how when you look at the light and it shines through your window and you see these little flecky things? In the olden days, those were flecky things. It's like your skin, dead skin and stuff like that. Nowadays, it's little pieces of plastic. So the stuff coming off your clothing, these little microfibers are floating in the air. And so therefore you'll be able to breathe in some of those things. And there was a paper that just came out that says the olfactory bulb, that's the place that you smell. They found microplastic in the place where you smell. So it is getting up there through just breathing it in. So we have to be careful about that. So hang your clothes to dry. So maybe take out the child. But the idea is that if we can avoid using the dryer, it would be better. I understand it's hard to do that, but at least be careful as we're drying the plastic kind of stuff, the polyester kind of material you will be releasing. I love these pictures of these old ladies. So this is the tea and toasters. So two messages here. One is if you only have tea and toast, you're not going to get all the amino acids and proteins that you need. So we need more nutrition than that. But the reason why I'm showing you this one is because of the tea bag. So it turns out the tea bag now they use a coating of plastic inside to make it more durable. And unfortunately, we're now putting it into hot water. And so therefore 11.6 billion microplastic particles per tea bag are coming out. And this was research done in McGill University here in Quebec. And they said that there's about 3.1 billion nanoparticles. Nano just means smaller size, nanometers. Micro is micrometers, so not as small, but you can see these particles. Now, the good news is I think our body is able to defend against this. So in other words, it's not like you drank 11 billion and it all goes into you. I think our body is able to defend, but some of those things will get in. So therefore, maybe the loose leaf tea instead of the bags, or get the bags where it says that there's no plastic in them. That might be a good strategy. This is your artery. And this is what happens as we get older. Blood pressure will damage the wall. Then cholesterol will go into the wall. And then every so often, this thing will rupture, and then you'll cause a blood clot to form right here. And so that's what we have in terms of heart attacks and strokes. And for patients with diabetes, heart attacks and strokes is the #1 reason why they die. So therefore, if we can control your blood pressure, control your cholesterol, and give you something to stop the blood clot, like aspirin and those kinds of things would be useful. Now, for aspirin and stuff like that, we only use it in people that have had heart attacks or strokes. They've already had a blood clot, then it makes sense to give them aspirin and those kinds of medication. Diabetes medications have now come to the forefront. You know that GLP-1, the Ozempic, and the SGLT2, the one that makes you pee out stuff? Those two classes of medication has shown very good benefits in preventing heart failure, kidney failure, those kinds of things. So some of our diabetes medications is not just lowering sugar, but it's also helping patients in that particular way. And inflammation makes this plaque more likely to rupture. And so inflammation would be like smoking, the big belly with the fat that makes inflammation kind of stuff. Infections like COVID caused a lot of people to have heart attacks and strokes because of the inflammation. Flu would cause inflammation. So that's why some experts are saying, don't forget to get vaccination. So if you have diabetes, make sure that you're vaccinated so that you don't get the flu and the RSV or any of these other things, so that you don't have the big inflammation process that you have to go through as well. So these are the things that we play with in terms of trying to protect patients in terms of our patients. And so in the Canadian diabetes guidelines, we actually list out these things and in a list, and we just decided it was A, B, C, D, E, so it would be easier. And so we said A1C is the A, so that's the percentage of sugar that's sticking to your blood. We like to see it nice and close to normal being 6%. So we'd like to see it at 6.5 or less. Your blood pressure, we want it less than 130/80. Higher than that, more chance of heart attacks and strokes. We would like to see your cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, the LDL, as low as possible, at least less than 2. But if you get to 1.5, 1.4, even better. So the lower that number goes, the better. And then the drugs to protect your heart. So ACE inhibitors, they lower blood pressure, but they also protect your heart. Statins, this lowers cholesterol, but it also protects your heart in addition to just lowering cholesterol. Aspirin, if you've had already a blood, or like a heart attack or a stroke, a blood clot somewhere, then aspirin would be a good idea. And those two new guys that I told you about, the SGLT2 and the GLP-1 kind of medications would be useful. And these drugs all have shown that we can protect the patient, not just by lowering sugar, but also protect them for heart attacks and strokes or dying. And then don't forget about exercise and healthy living and smoking, right? Please don't smoke, because smoking just drives everything, more inflammation, more everything. So let's quit smoking. And then screening for complications, check your eyes, check your feet. Can you feel your toes? Those are all things. Check your kidneys. Is your kidneys doing well? These are things that are very silent. So we have to go looking for them to make sure that these are not the complications of diabetes that's developing. And then self-management and stress and barriers. In other words, make sure that the patient understands how to manage their diabetes and that they can afford the medication and the testing. So we try to help out with that as well. And if you do all that stuff, this was the Steno-2 study. They said, let's do all that stuff, better control of A1C and blood pressure and cholesterol. Let's try and do all of that. What's the difference? So this is the usual care group in terms of their heart attack rates. And you could see it's quite high. And then this is the intensive group where they just did a little bit better. They did better on their blood pressure. They did better on their cholesterol, better on their sugar control. And you could see a reduction of about 50% of events. And the number needed to treat means that if you treat 5 people for this study, you'll protect 1 person from having a heart attack, stroke, or dying. So therefore, it's actually very good that if we do those simple things, we can actually reduce the risk of complications or dying by a very significant number. So exercise, so I love this picture of exercising. We used to tell people, go get a dog. Anyway, so this is how she walks her dog. Okay, so she's very creative. And I love this final picture. This is how they walk their dog. So exercise is very important, and not this kind of exercise where you're actually moving your muscles. And the reason why exercise is so important is think of your muscles as having doors that allow sugar to come in to be burned as fuel. Insulin comes along and turns the key to open the door. If there's only one door, then there's very little sugar that's going to come in. So if you're sitting around watching TV all day long, you only need one door. You're not burning a lot of sugar. And so therefore, the insulin, when it comes along, it only turns and opens one door. So very little sugar will go into your muscle. So most of the sugar will stay in your blood. So therefore, it'll be high in your blood. On the other hand, when you start exercising, your muscles actually put up more doors. In other words, your muscle cells say, I need sugar, so I'm going to put more doors on the surface. So now when insulin comes and turns the key, all these doors open, and then the sugar comes in and gets burnt up as fuel. So you can imagine that's why exercise is so important. As soon as you exercise, more doors, insulin is now working better because one key turn and I can open all these doors and the sugar comes in. So when we used to talk about insulin resistance, in other words, insulin wasn't working well, if one insulin is controlling only one door, of course it's not working well. But if one insulin molecule is controlling 8 doors, then it's very effective. So therefore, exercise actually gets rid of insulin resistance. In other words, it makes the doors open, there's more of them, and so therefore the insulin can do its job. This is a picture I wanted to show you if you don't do anything, what happens to your temperature. In other words, where's the blood flow going? And as you can see, if you're not moving around, the blood flow is mainly just in your core and up to your head. And so therefore, very little blood goes into your legs. Your legs are very expensive to keep because the muscles need a lot of energy. And so therefore, if you don't move around, this is your distribution. So you use most of your energy around your middle part of your body. If you move around, then all of a sudden we're sending blood flow everywhere. So if we open up the pipe and send more blood flow to your leg muscles and your leg muscles burns off some sugar for you, your sugar levels will be lower. So that's why now, instead of saying go and exercise for an hour at a gym, they're now saying just move around. In other words, get up, walk around, go up and down the stairs. You don't have to do big physical activity. You just need to keep the muscles going. It's kind of like leaving the engine on in your car. As long as your engine is on, it's going to be burning the fuel, and therefore you're going to be getting rid of the sugar. So if you're sitting at a desk and you can't get up because of your job, just move your feet around, put a water bottle underneath it, and just roll your feet back and forth. And that way you're using your muscles and you're burning up sugar, and you're still sending blood flow in there. So just in case you don't have time to go and physically do exercise, we can just do this movement around that we see. And we learn much of this from the blue zone areas. These are areas where people live past 100 in unusual numbers of people, right? So you could see Okinawa, and you can see sort of California is there, Italy is there. They're not related genetically, but they all have the same principles. And the principles are very, very simple. They lead a very good long life because they have purpose in life. So they get up and they're farming, they're fixing posts and stuff like that. They have community. So in other words, they belong with other people. So even if they don't want to get up today because they have to go and help these other people, they want to get up and help each other. So that gets them motivated. And they're doing useful jobs, right? They're not just sitting there waiting for their next meal, like in the nursing homes that we see. They're actually physically out there, you know, doing the yard work, doing the fence work and things like that. And this guy was very funny. He was fixing a fence, and the reporter asked him, "Why are you fixing the fence?" And he said, "Because it's broken," right? Like what, like how come you don't understand that? So he was, I think, 90 years old or something like that when he was fixing this fence. And you could see the physical activity that you're doing. In other words, keeping their muscles strong. And the diabetes rates here in these regions are very low. And that's because they're physically active, they're eating well, they're not eating a lot of fried stuff. It's slow cooking, so no deep frying or anything like that. It's slow stews, that kind of stuff. So therefore, the food is actually of good quality, and they eat together. And so therefore, that feeling of belonging helps them to feel calm. So if you go there, you don't feel that stress, you know, that I showed you before. So you can imagine that their stress level is lower. Therefore, their blood pressure, their heart rate, their sugar doesn't need to be in battle mode. So that might be a good strategy for us. And finally, I thought I'd show you this label from a clothing, and it was very funny. It says, remove child before washing. So I'm not exactly sure what bad thing happened to the child that needs this label, but definitely that was funny. And I guess sometimes we just have to state the obvious, that it's not that complicated. I mean, we make diabetes complicated. Inside our body, we have a lot of complicated, you know, communication and messages going on. But what we need to do is not that complicated. We need to exercise, keep our muscles moving. We need to eat healthy, okay? Not the deep fried stuff, not the takeout stuff and things like that. Eat healthy foods, slow cook temperature, no deep frying, that kind of thing. No smoking, no other chemicals, alcohol, those kinds of things. And if we do that, then we allow the body to actually function normally. So in other words, we're getting in the way of the body. In terms of stress and sleep, let's make sure that we get some of that so that we're sending the body the signal that you are not in danger. You are not in trouble. You don't have to kick in the emergency, pump the sugar up, pump the blood pressure up. And if we do that, then we can manage our sugars very well. So if you don't have diabetes, that would be a way to prevent diabetes. If you do have diabetes, doing these things will make your diabetes easier to control. And so therefore, hopefully we'll have very low complication rates for you. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for staying awake, and I'll turn things back over to Tina.
Your deep dive into diabetes has been an eye-opener in so many ways for me, and I'm sure for our audience as well. Thank you very much, Dr. Len. I would like to now invite Dr. Sudhi to moderate the Q&A session with Dr. Lin. Please submit your questions through the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen.
Peter, thank you very much for that excellent, excellent talk.
Thank you.
You do have a gift, Peter, of taking complex things and making it simplified so we can understand. And we are going to honor you at the gala because you've done so much for the community, and we're grateful. So thank you so much. There were some questions. So one was a question about Zig Duo.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly does it do?
Yeah. So Zigdual is a combination of two medications. And so basically it's dapagliflozin, one of those SGLT2 drugs that we talked about that is good for heart failure, kidney, and also for diabetes. And the other one is metformin that's inside there. And the metformin is there. That's an older drug that we've used. Metformin has also shown less heart attacks in patients with diabetes. So it's an old drug, but it's a good standby that we always use. But now we notice that we're adding more other medications. So in the case of Zigdual, it's two medications in one tablet. And so you're getting very good care. The metformin component, when your kidneys begin to fail, we have to pull back on that one because the kidneys, when they don't work very well, you'll accumulate the metformin. So then you'll get too much metformin in your body. So if your kidney function goes down, then we will pull you off of the metformin. So then we would separate. So we don't give you Zigdual anymore. We'll still give you the dapagliflozin part of it, but we'll remove the metformin part. So just keep an eye on your kidney function on those drugs. But otherwise, it's a good combination medication.
So a question came up about early morning glucose levels going up while somebody's trying to do intermittent fasting. What is your recommendation for those people?
Sure.
Despite intermittent fasting, the early morning sugars are high.
Yeah. So the early morning sugar rises is because of the liver, right? Remember, overnight, you're not eating anything. So it's not coming from food, but it's the liver that's pumping out sugar. So in other words, the liver is not listening. So that's another sign of insulin resistance, right? The insulin is saying you don't have to do this, but the liver is still continuing to pump out. So in sometimes those patients need some insulin, some extra insulin towards evening. The other concern that we have is sometimes people dip at night. So people that used to take insulin, what would happen is that the insulin would peak in the middle of the night. The effect is the highest in the middle of the night, but you're not eating at that time, so therefore the sugar is dropped. And then when the sugar is dropped, your body said, oh my gosh, the sugar is too low. I better add sugar in. So your liver starts piling up sugar into that. And then they would have very high sugars in the morning. So just double check two things. One, are you taking insulin? And therefore that's the high point of when the insulin is happening. Or two, is it because your liver is not listening? So therefore we have to give you some other therapies. One very easy way to check is, remember that meter that I talked about where the sensor is in there? You can wear that, and then overnight you'll get readings throughout the night. So you can actually see what's happening to your readings. Is it because you went too low and then now you fly up? Or is it just a steady rise as you go up? And that's very useful information for your doctors to decide what medications to change for you as well.
Thank you. As people get older, is that tight control of A1C as important? And what is the correlation between fasting sugars and A1C? Was a question.
Sure. So fasting sugar and A1C, definitely, if your fasting sugars are high, there's going to be more sugar sticking to your hemoglobin. But we started to notice some people didn't have very high fasting, but their A1C, the sugar sticking to their blood, was high. So in that situation, it's after meals, right? So after you eat, the sugar is flying high. So when we just measured fasting glucose, we were missing what's happening after your meals. So when we started to use those monitors, we can actually see people, they were fine in the morning, but when they had breakfast, all of a sudden you see that spike up. So we both use both numbers. We look at the A1C and we look at the fasting. The A1C tells us over the day how much sugar is sticking. And it tells us a number that is stable for about 3 months because your red blood cells die every 3 months. And then you get a new reading coming up. So once the sugar sticks to the blood, it doesn't unstick. So that's why you have to wait about 3 months before you get a new reading for that. For the morning sugars, it's useful to look at. But remember, we also want to check after meals. So oftentimes I'll tell people, if you're doing the poking thing, why don't you poke it at different times of the day? So today you'll poke it before breakfast. Tomorrow you'll poke it after breakfast. The day after you'll poke it before lunch, and the day after you'll poke it after lunch. That way, every day you only poke once, but over a week or two, you'll get readings across the whole day. So that might be useful for people. As far as control, the older you are, the more loose we're going to allow your sugar. And it was because of one thing. In the olden days, the drugs that we used, when we control your sugar very tight, we often caused you to go too low. because of the way the drugs work. And so now the newer drugs, they don't seem to cause the low sugar. And so now we're saying maybe for our older people, we can control their sugar well because the drugs that we're using do not cause that low sugar side effect. In the olden days, by the time we control you very tight, you were having lots of low sugars and people were getting dizzy. So nowadays with modern medications, we don't have the lows. So therefore, for even our elderly people, we want to keep them tighter. Now, if you are, let's say, terminal, like let's say somebody's lying in a nursing home and they're not going to be leaving the nursing home, then there's no sense giving very aggressive treatment, right? So we just make them comfortable, but we don't have to be super aggressive because their life expectancy is going to be short.
Great. Thank you. There's a question about alcohol and does alcohol contribute to diabetes? And is there an option to alcohol?
Yeah, so alcohol contributes to lots of things. And you'll remember the new alcohol guidelines. I actually met the guy that wrote the guidelines. He said he's not a very popular guy because basically it said don't drink, right? So if you drink a lot, you should cut down. If you don't drink, don't start. And the reason why that is because alcohol is attached to many complications. In terms of diabetes, the alcohol gives you extra calories, right? So alcohol is ethanol, which is a very good fuel for your body. So your liver will burn that fuel, but it won't burn the other stuff that you eat. So that's why it increases fat deposit in your liver and things like that, because it's a very good fuel. So think of it, I've given you all this fuel, so your body doesn't need the food that you just ate, so all of that gets stored. So alcohol will increase your chance of having a fatty liver and all those other things. Does it directly cause diabetes? The answer is no, but it could insult and hurt your pancreas. So we've had people that drink and then the pancreas gets inflamed. And then once that gets inflamed, then the cells that make insulin live in the pancreas, then you'll affect that as well. So alcohol, pancreatitis, then diabetes has occurred. So if you can limit your alcohol to 2 drinks per week is what the recommendation is. The idea is that would be healthier for you in general. If you like the taste of alcohol, or at least the idea of drinking, there's those low alcohol, like this 0.9% or 0.4% or whatever, these low alcoholic drinks, beers. So it looks like a beer and it sort of tastes like a beer, but the alcohol concentration is very low. So that might be a nice way if you're doing social drinking that you can still belong to the group without taking in a whole lot of alcohol.
Thank you. Question about diabetes and prediabetes. Should prediabetes be treated?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we tried a study like that, prediabetes for treatment using Avandia, and it worked. It prevented people from going into diabetes. But unfortunately, with that particular drug, which is no longer on the market, there was actually more heart failure in those people. So there was a side effect. So ever since then, we've been very careful about prediabetes because we don't want to give medications at that particular stage. Having said that, there's 2 things you can do for prediabetes. Metformin. So metformin has been used in prediabetes and it is helpful. But what's even more helpful is exercise. So if you exercise 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, there was a study that says we can reduce people going from prediabetes to diabetes by 60% by just doing that exercise. With metformin, if we gave metformin to the same group, about 30% less going to diabetes with metformin. So exercise is almost double the effect of preventing. So that's why the guidelines will say, if you have prediabetes, do the exercise and lifestyle, because that gives you a better reduction, less chance of going across.
Some questions about food, fasting, and eating late at night.
Yes.
So what are your guidelines in terms of fermented foods?
Mm-hmm.
Is it safe to eat late at night? And is fasting beneficial for burning body fat?
Yeah, sure. So a couple things. So fasting is helpful because you basically are not taking in any calories. What you'll do is you'll burn off all your quick energy, right? So you'll burn off your sugar, you'll burn off your glycogen stores in your muscle and in your liver, and then you'll tap into fat. The problem is if we do that, two things happen is now you tap into fat. So whatever toxins in the fat will come out very quickly as you burn the fat. And number two is that once you see food, then you're going to eat and your body will try to restore all of it and sort of hoard. So that's why if you're going to do the intermittent fasting, as I said, do not get hungry. So you can go, let's say 12 hours, no hungry, that's good. If you go 14 hours and you're hungry, that's no good because your body now is going to kick into this hoarding mode when you do have food. As far as late at night feeding, the problem with that is that all the food will get stored because when the food comes in and it enters the bloodstream, if your muscles need it, it'll get used and burnt up, right? So let's say during the daytime, you're eating food, you're using your muscles, food comes in, goes into the bloodstream, they'll say, hey, the muscles need you. And so therefore that glucose will get burnt off. At nighttime, you eat and then you lie down, there is no need to burn it. And so therefore all of the extra stuff that's floating around in your blood has no muscles to go to. So then that all gets stored into the fat stores. And once you store it into fat, it's very hard to get out. It's like a GIC. Like once you put it into a GIC, it's hard to get the money back out again. So your body will fight you because that's like a storage for survival in the future. Because remember, we grew up in a time when there was no food. So that's why we need to store it as fat. So any extra we stored as fat so that if next week we didn't catch something, I would still have some energy to burn. But nowadays we have so much food coming in every single day that we have all these fat stores that are full. But the fat stores will still say, I'm here to make sure that you survive in case there's no food. So nighttime eating and sleeping is not a good plan because you're just going to accumulate fat. And this is the same strategy as the sumo wrestlers. So the sumo wrestlers are fed a high fat meal late at night and they're told to go to sleep. And that way, all of that gets entered into the fat. So I tell my patients, if you eat before you go to sleep, then you're doing the sumo wrestler diet. So you're going to look like a sumo wrestler as well. Okay, so in terms of the fermented foods, that might be relating to the microbiome. So there is some thought that if you eat fermented foods, that you will get more of the microbiome kind of bacteria. I guess the key thing is to make sure it's still diverse, right? So in other words, anytime that we narrow our eating to just fermented food or just, bread or just muffins, then the microbiome narrows because the bacteria are there to process off chemicals that we're eating in. So if we don't eat certain things, then those bacteria have nothing to do, so they disappear. And I think right now they're saying that we used to have 1,000 different types, but because we're into fast food and a lot of it is the same kind of stuff, we're now down to about 600 different types of bacteria. So we've lost 300 to 400 species of bacteria in our bowel. And so therefore we might not be able to process off those types of chemicals. So if we can widen the types of foods that we eat, perhaps we can pick up some of those bacteria species back again.
Thank you very much, Peter. We're probably we're having to cut back on our questions. So there was, I think, an important question about type 1 diabetes. Is there hope for type 1 diabetics?
There is. So first of all, right now we have better insulins and things like that for people. So the insulin side of thing has become much improved. We have pumps. We now have sensors and pumps. So it reads the reading on what's your sugar and it will tell the pump how much insulin they give you. So therefore, this is now almost like an artificial pancreas in that sense. There's lots of research going on. Can we create the cells to make insulin? Can we make beta cells? Can we convert it from some other cell? So there's a lot of research going on in there so that eventually we just give you the beta cells that you're missing, and then therefore you can produce insulin on your own. But right now, the technology is the pump, so sensor and pump, and that's known as closed loop. So in other words, the sensor reads the sugar, tells the pump what to do. The pump gives the right amount of insulin, and then this loop keeps going around and around, and it controls your sugars very well. So that means that we now have lots of type 1 diabetes patients that live for a very, very long time because we can control the sugars so well with this sort of artificial pancreas, I guess, if you want to call it. And so therefore, I think it's very good for type 1 patients. Hopefully in the future, we'll be able to give you back
some beta cells of your own, and therefore you can make insulin on your own.
Thank you very, very much, Peter. I think we're going to end the Q&A session there. And honestly, Peter, your information has been very, very welcome and giving us hope for the future of people with diabetes. Thank you so much. And now back to you, Tina.
Thank you, audience, for your questions and comments. Thank you, Dr. Lin, for your insights, and thank you, Dr. D, for moderating the Q&A. I would now like to invite our illustrious leader, Smita Chandra, to say a few words.
Thank you, Tina. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the webinar this evening. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Dr. Lin, for your wonderful presentation. We have learned so much from you, as always. And thank you, Dr. D, for introducing us to another lovely new word. Our vocabularies are growing by leaps and bounds. I would like to thank our team that works very hard to bring you these informative webinars. Our lovely MC Tina Walia for hosting the webinar and creating the slideshow. Sridhar Rao for tech and Zoom support and his always savvy advice. Dr. Asha Devanation for disseminating our flyers, extending our outreach, and connecting with many community organizations and libraries. Ashima Jain for seamlessly running the slideshow. Eshna Roy for creatively designing our flyers and slides to make them bold, beautiful, and eye-catching. I would like to give a huge thanks to our ambassadors, Roisin and Paul O'Hara, who have tirelessly helped distribute our flyers within the community. And a very special thank you to Jamie Sinton, our newest ambassador, for helping us spread the word. If you have enjoyed our presentations and would like to support us, please donate to our outreach through our website at www.trevo.org. Thank you for supporting, attending, and promoting our webinars. We would love for your feedback about how we're doing and what you would like to see in future webinars. Please answer this short and simple survey to help us out. The first question is, how useful did you find this webinar? Very useful, useful, not useful. How did you learn about this webinar? Email from Trevo, Smita Chandra, Dr. Sudhi Devanation, family and friends, local library or community center, Sheridan College Health Clinics, city halls, or other sources. Do you intend to attend our upcoming webinar on breast cancer? And what other topics would you like us to present in the future? Please let us know so that we can arrange for suitable speakers to help educate our community and to spread the word about good health. We're really excited to present to you our upcoming webinar on breast cancer with Dr. Mala Bal. She will enlighten us about the latest developments in the treatment and management of breast cancer. To find out more, please be sure to register for our next webinar as soon as I send out the new flyers. Thank you so much for spending the evening with us. I will now hand it back to Tina. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Smita. On behalf of the webinar outreach wing of the Ripple Effect Wellness Organization, I would like to thank you all for attending the webinar tonight. See you at our next webinar on October the 30th. Looking forward to welcoming the fall. Have a good night.